America's civil rights movement, ushered in an era of a cultural revolution in the United States.
It was a great unifying time in our fight for freedom, justice, and equality that brought together young white people and older whites and African Americans that was for freedom.
We got involved because we knew that right is might and wrong is very strong.
The legacy of slavery continued to define the collective consciousness of blacks and whites. Jim Crow laws and customs outraged many who demanded that the United States live up to the ideals established in its Constitution. Action, they believed, was necessary to correct these wrongs.
We were always stereotyped. We're less intelligent, we're not as smart, our black rubs off, we stink.
They called us slaves. We wasn't really slaves, we were Africa made into slaves. They called us Negroes, they called us black, they called us coon, boot, and shoe, and a lot of other names.
From the abyss of southern plantations, the slaves wailed and shouted songs that made bearable the sweat from their brow and the cut of the lash as they labored from sunup to sundown. Rooted in biblical testament, the lyrics and rhythm of early spiritual and gospel songs changed over time, but their essence remained the same: to express the changing needs and hardships of the black experience.
See, the church played such a dominant role within civil rights. The church back in the civil rights movement and that era back in the 50s and 60s during the movement, that was the place, that was the only secure place that African Americans had. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine all in my home. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. So that was the only hope that we had, was this light.
During the 1900s, many religious songs were modified and adapted to the changing conditions in America. Among these were Charles Albert Tindley's song, I'll Overcome Someday, which has been credited by some as shaping the civil rights movement's anthem, We Shall Overcome.
Pete Seeger, Guy Carawan, and some others got together and recomposed I'll Overcome Someday, which probably was already in the public domain by that time, and they published it, popularized it within the civil rights movement as We Shall Overcome, and of course with direct pertinence to the movement, not overcoming sin, but overcoming segregation.
Pete Seeger believed the conditions of poor whites and segregated blacks sprang from common roots. Like the spiritual and gospel songs that sustained blacks through slavery and Jim Crow, We Shall Overcome served as both the food and armor of the movement.
Bob Dylan was the troubadour for these college students from the North that would come down to the South for the Freedom Rides, the sit-ins, and different things.
Many songs that the young whites, Bob Dylan and others, began to create songs related to freedom and justice and equality.
Bob Dylan's 1964 song, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, told the story of William Billy Zatzinger, a white man and son of a wealthy Baltimore farmer, who on February 9, 1963, killed Hattie Carroll, a black woman who was working as a barmaid at a Baltimore hotel. Zatzinger's 6-month sentence for killing Carroll enraged communities throughout the nation. This injustice found its way into Dylan's music.
The folk music was an important soundtrack, you might say, to the civil rights movement, especially in the 1950s and 1960s.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. recognized the central role music played in the movement. In 1967, King praised those who used R&B music as a crossover bridge to support, strengthen, and give expression to the movement's ideals of nonviolent social action.
the songs that just stood out, especially during the movement, would be Sam Cooke. In 1963, had written a song, A Change Is Gonna Come. He gave us that hope, you know, that a change is gonna come. I'm born by the river in a little tent. So they talked about all of everybody's experience.
Hard-rocking and hard-talking James Brown minced no words when in 1968 he told African Americans to take pride in their racial identity.
I'm black and I'm proud. That was huge for me, just to be able to hear those words being spoken with such conviction. Made me myself, growing up in the 70s and 80s, black and proud.
James Brown made clear that racial equality meant giving blacks access to education and jobs which would empower them. He sang,
I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door. But his point was, all I need is the door to be open. You don't have to give it to me. I'll get it.
Jazz and classical pianist Nina Simone proclaimed her opposition to white supremacy with the release of her 1964 album, Nina Simone in Concert. That album contained the song Mississippi Goddamn, which Simone wrote to condemn the assassination of civil rights leader Medgar Evers and the Birmingham church bombing.
Nina Simone, in a lot of her songs, Little Girl Blue, For Women, she really talked about the strength of African Americans. She did not victimize African Americans who were either oppressed or repressed or depressed. She really said, despite our struggles and hardships, we are strong.
In 1967, when Aretha Franklin released her song Respect, her rendition of Otis Redding's original recording was seen by some as an anthem for the movement.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, and that was not only for just a female, but to respect female, but to respect us as people.
Fashion became emblematic of the pride and aspirations of civil rights activists. The pressed suits, colorful dresses, and polished shoes were worn not for entertainment, but as a means of combating damaging racial stereotypes.
People who were involved in the movement wanted to make sure that they represented. And the way in which they represented was to dress in suits with ties, Sunday dresses. John Lewis made the point to me once that, Beverly, the reason we wore suits is because we didn't want them to disrespect and treat us like second-class citizens.
As the movement progressed, so did cultural awareness. Blacks adopted African dress and embraced natural hairstyles as an outward expression of their shared African ancestry.
We wanted to identify with a movement, and we had to dress the part. We wanted to go back to Africa, and we wanted to put our dashikis on, our kufu kind of hat that I have on now.
Fashion became a tool for visual communication. Whether it's the afros that spoke to black power and black pride, a sense of black self-consciousness, or the kente cloth that people would wear was also a statement of the fact that I'm conscious of who I am and what I am and what I believe.
Kente cloth is a cloth that was developed in Africa and Ghana and Senegal. It symbolizes all the brilliant colors in Africa.
During the mid-1960s, the power of dress to affirm racial identity and pride moved into the urban black communities with more overtly political overtones. In Oakland, California, the Black Panther Party was formed after the assassination of Malcolm X on February 21, 1965. The black berets, the black leather jackets, and the black pants of the Black Panthers epitomized strength. While many rejected the Black Panther Party's platform, the impact of their dress resonated in the hearts and minds of many African Americans.
We had on the black tams, the black leather jackets, and as a symbol of a panther, a slick, strong animal, not a lion, but a panther, so it was black. Black symbolizing power.
Born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1944, Angela Davis joined several radical groups, including the Communist Party and the Black Panthers. The natural Afro hairstyle worn by Davis was seen by some as a fashion statement. and by others as an act of rebellion.
Just the image of Angela was recognized worldwide as a rebellious and a stance for freedom, and her hair was part of that statement.
During the 1960s, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, organized the famous freedom rides throughout the South to challenge legal segregation. But some members of SNCC became increasingly disenchanted with Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent action.
Well, Stokely Carmichael, the leader of SNCC, conducted a movement among young people. And he wasn't really opposed to Dr. King, but he felt Dr. King's nonviolent movement was too gradual, too slow, using moral suasion. And he came up with the concept of black power. Instead of soul power, he said black power. And he balled his fists up, and he held that fist up as a symbol of power. Well, it scared white people to death because they thought we were getting ready to just attack them. But it really wasn't about them. It was about a clenched fist symbolized power. And it was solid black and strong. And we were strong black people.
After Malcolm X's release from prison and his ascension through the ranks of the Nation of Islam, he became a controversial advocate for black rights. Known for his forceful rhetoric, Malcolm X was also known for his sense of style. Wearing either a traditional black suit and tie, while at other times a crisp bow tie, Malcolm X's persona became one of the prominent images of the Nation of Islam.
While I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam, there's still something in the bow tie. There's still something in that conservative dress, that nice clean shirt, not bold lines, and so on and so forth, that affects me today. Just seeing that is what a strong black man looks like.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.
In the late 1960s, the strategies of the movement spilled over into the anti-Vietnam War protest. These young men and women acquired many of their tactics from their observations of or involvement in the civil rights movement.
The flower children, if you're speaking of the beatniks, they called them, and young European people. Young, said European or white people, always wanted to be in the movement. And they would come to our meetings, and when we would allow them to be involved, and they wanted to integrate also. So they wore blue jeans and different things, and met with African Americans. And it was a love children, you call it. We were expressing that black and white can get together and wasn't afraid to show it.
Dr. King openly opposed the Vietnam War. Many civil rights activists believed that Dr. King's opposition to the war would alienate President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had aggressively pushed for the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965.
Dr. King was a little disgusted, of course, with the war. And he called Stokely Carmichael and all the civil rights movers together for his sermon at his church to denounce the war in Vietnam. In essence, he said that there's a war on poverty that needs to be fought here.
This was one instance where a large majority, a vast majority of people in American society was against the war. And so clothing became a symbol of that. What we wore spoke to that. We had blue jeans that had peace signs on the back of them.
We thought we were changing the world. That was our goal, was to change the way human beings treated each other and the way governments treated their citizens.
The estimated 125,000 Manhattan marchers include students, housewives, beatnik poets, doctors, businessmen, teachers, priests, and nuns. Makeup and costumes were bizarre.
Similar to the songs that captured the spirit of those seeking racial equality, many popular musicians wrote songs in opposition to the Vietnam War. In 1971, Marvin Gaye released What's Going On.
I think those songs gave me a sense of strength and a sense of pride. And it also showed me how the arts in any genre, from music to fine art to theater, can be used as a megaphone.
The struggle for civil rights transformed America. This transformation took place alongside fundamental political, social, and cultural changes. While advocates for racial equality had divergent philosophies on how to achieve their goals, their voices were united in the belief that two nations, one suffering under the vestiges of slavery and inequality, the other free, could no longer coexist.
In spite of the dangers, in spite of the threats to their physical body or to their lives, they moved forward because they knew that they were all unified for the same cause, and that was the cause of freedom, justice, and equality.